That sounds like a good time.
I don't understand because I didn't think I interacted with them at all.
The answer is because.
Yeah. Oh no, man. I'm a little pissed about it. I suspect I'm just going to use that little like snippet of code that WebMock suggests and just deal with it later.
Am I going crazy or did you rearrange the room? Because I looked at the back and I was like, wait, it looks different, but she has the same exact picture right next to her on the wall. So I thought there was a doorway behind you before.
No, so when I was having a terrible day yesterday, I rearranged my room so there was a Millie corner, which she hated, so that wasn't helpful.
That looks
Um,
comfortable though. I'll take her corner and take naps in
yeah,
there.
actually, I ended up like curling up in there, and the cats came and snuggled me, so that was nice. But
But you
I'm in
also
the
placed your wall art in the same exact spot.
no, so I'm in the same spot. The couch changed walls. This white thing used to be in front of the
Huh.
window, and this like corner stuff over here didn't exist. So like a lot of it's in the same place. The bookshelf is in the same place, the art is in the same place, but the furniture moved around.
There was never a doorway directly behind you.
No, the door is around that corner.
I'm so confused. Okay.
This way.
Okay. That
Yes.
works. Looks good though.
Thank you. It was unfortunately not successful at what I needed it to be. Joe, that's a great joke. Oh no, there's no Regina babies this morning. I'm ready for the rest jokes in response to that question, Brian.
Just get them all out now. Just get it out of your system.
Have you ever heard a particularly good joke response to that?
All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get kicked off for the morning. So today we are going to be talking about building an API in Rails. So up until this point in the mod, we've done a pretty good amount of consuming of APIs. So that's where some developers have built this system, an API for us to consume. We read their guidelines, their documentation, whatever it is. We send the proper HTTP requests to the proper URLs, or you might say endpoints, and then they give us some data back in an expected format. So that's what we've done up to this point. Now we're going to start to flip our perspective here, and we're going to be the ones building the APIs. So I've got a couple warm-up questions for you. I will drop them back in the chat again. And then I will also put them in your cohort channel just for a more permanent place. I want you to take, so the questions are, what is REST and why do we need it? And when building an API, how will our tests be different from feature tests we have implemented in the past? So one question around REST, kind of like looking backwards, reviewing what we've learned. One question looking forward, now that we're building APIs, think about how this might be different. I want you to take a minute to think for yourself, and then I'll put you with some small groups. All right, your rooms are open now. You have 5 minutes to discuss. All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's talk about this together. So let's go one question at a time here. Let's start with the REST question. Can I get a volunteer to give us your thoughts? Let's go to Lawrence.
Generally, people are going to be expecting your API to react in a certain way. They're going to expect to be able to get and post. So if it's not RESTful, it's going to be a lot harder for them to use.
Yeah, so just as an example, Lawrence, if someone is posting, what would they expect to happen?
They would expect there to be a new instance of whatever they were sending to your database.
So I'll just say it creates something in that case. Yeah, great. So one small change I'll make here, you said the API is expected to react in a certain way. I'll just leave this more general and say the application reacts in a certain way, because REST is not API specific, demonstrated by the fact that last mod we emphasized REST, but we weren't necessarily emphasizing it in the context of APIs. It is important for APIs, but REST is more of like a general web principle, I would say. Other thoughts on REST? Let's go to Taya.
This is kind of a question. Is this an architectural standard something? What's the right terminology for that?
I think I might say it's an architectural pattern. I I think if you look at the formal definition, it'll say like web architecture style. Yeah, really, this is kind of jargony. I think if I'm going to like try and explain this more simply, I would just say it's like guidelines for how to build our app. And a specific part of our app, which we haven't quite mentioned yet. Andrew.
So in our group, we kind of got a little sidetracked on this really fascinating question of why on earth REST is called a representational state transfer. What do those words even mean? We have an idea of what states are and transferring things are, and I guess representational represents them, but it's like, okay, we know what it does. We know it's architectural guidelines and it's not absolute and all that, but why is it called that? Why is it called this?
Yeah.
And what does the meaning of those words have? And we did not have any real answers. So you could shed a light on that. It would be fantastic because I'm super curious.
Sure. So the representational state transfer, that's what REST actually stands for. It is an acronym. So sometimes it would be more accurately written as R lowercase e s t. You're right, Andrew. This term, I would say, like, doesn't really mean a whole lot on its own. And that's kind of why we don't really talk about representational state transfer. Usually we just say REST and we kind of like know what REST is referring to, because representational state transfer like doesn't really mean much. The reason, I'll do my best to like describe what representational state transfer is getting at. This is getting at the idea that each HTTP is stateless. So as we talked about in our cookies and sessions class, HTTP is stateless. So each HTTP request doesn't necessarily remember what the last one did. So REST is a way of building applications so that users can send multiple requests, have expected behavior, and keep track of state, but within the application's database. So the application keeps track of state, and that state is transferred back and forth between the user via HTTP. So HTTP itself is stateless. It's really just transmitting these different changes of state. So for instance, we can keep track of if someone has an API for pets. Well, we did build one that we saw in the one of our practice. It was the practice exercise for the class on Friday, I think. Anyway, we can use that API to create a pet and then update a pet and then maybe even destroy a pet. So we're able to like keep track of the state of the pet, but it's not like the user's keeping track of it. It's more of like the application is keeping track of it, and we're just transferring the state back and forth. That's my best explanation. But yeah, in general, we typically don't like refer to that so much when we talk about REST. Any other thoughts on REST? So I have a follow-up question for you all. So I wrote down here like architectural pattern, it's guidelines for how to build our app. What part of our app, it's not the entire app, but what part of our app are we really thinking about when we're thinking about REST? Caleb?
The front end?
Not quite. Good guess, but that's not quite it. Let's go to Noah.
Is it the routes?
There you go. So this is going to be the routes. So when we say guidelines for how to build our app, we're really talking about, let's just change this to guidelines for how to build. This is more important. This is probably not a sub bullet. So guidelines for how to construct your routes. And then let's dig a little deeper into this, like what makes up a route? What are the parts of a route? Ty, is that hand from before, or do you want to enter this one?
It's still there. I was going to say, it also indicates what action you are going to in your controller.
Gotcha. Yes. Let's hold off on that for just 1 second here. Molly.
So I guess it defines the verbs and like how, like what should be done with them. So I guess like connecting to Taya's point.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So we're talking about the verb path combo and what should okay, so guidelines for how to construct a route. So one is the verb path combo accepted, and then also what should, excuse me, what should happen for a specific verb path combo, path combo. Yes, and exactly, that does, sorry, Molly, go.
I was gonna ask a follow-up question, so if you're
I just want to reiterate what you said is this is Taya's point. When we talk about like what should happen, typically we're talking about like controller actions at that point. Routes kind of like accept the request, controller actions decide what happens with the request. Go for it,
Molly. Our group was kind of trying to talk about or like talk through how you would properly talk about the difference or like relationship between REST and CRUD, and it kind of, I guess, like ultimately like what should happen is like your CRUD actions. So like, is it fair to say that like that REST deals with your routing and CRUD deals with like the actions that should be taken from them, or like is there a more like nuanced way that one would want to say that in a, for example, interview situation?
I think that's a really good point. That sounds really accurate to me. The way I would say it is REST says what, how about this? REST gives us guidelines for what CRUD action should happen for a given verb path combo. And that's our route. Can I get some examples? Like can I get an example of a specific verb path combo and what you would expect to happen based on that verb path combo? Actually, let's do this. If I get a post to /dogs, what would you expect to happen? Lawrence, I see your hand. Can I get someone that I haven't heard from yet today? I know you all know this. I know you can do this. Lee.
Would it be a create?
And specifically, what would be created?
A dog.
Yeah, exactly. What about, can I get another volunteer for this? What would you expect that route to do? Regina?
Wait, it's not update.
It's update.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then what would we be updating?
The dog. Oh, that specific dog, yeah. Dog one.
So I'll say the dog with the ID of one. Usually this is referring to like an ID. So this is REST in action. REST is given a verb path combo, you can just look at it and say, this is what I would expect to happen. It's not a rule. The application doesn't have to be built like that, but it's a very, very good guideline. As you all are demonstrating right now. It just makes our apps make a little bit more sense. Just doing some more like get to /dogs, this would be show all the dogs, and then we could do a single show page, et cetera, et cetera. So you all are familiar with REST. Anything else on REST? I think this is pretty good. Let's go to the second question. So that was kind of like leaning on what we already know about REST and building Rails apps. Thinking forward, now that we're going to be building an API, how are tests going to be different than tests we've implemented in the past? Joe.
It's just a guess, but I think the API apps don't have views. So like features test, typically you would test the views. But I guess maybe instead we would test like the JSON we're exposing maybe instead of that. I'm not really sure.
Sure. So I'm going to just put like a placeholder here for now. So we don't have views. So we don't do our normal, like, what are we not going to do now that we don't have views? And then the second one you said is we will need to test our JSON responses. So now that we're building, that's a great job, Joe. So now that we're building an API, we're just exposing this JSON. So there's not going to be a view component. So we're just going to have to test this pure data response. There's not going to be any sort of like presentation code with it. I want to fill in this blank here. So actually, let's do it. So we won't have views. So we don't do our normal feature testing. So then can I get some examples, like what aren't we going to see in these feature tests? Taya? Other volunteers?
Sorry, I lost everything in my brain.
You can bump. Yeah, that's fine. Caleb.
Okay, I feel better about this one. We won't have the expect page to have content.
There you go. So we're not going to see expect page to have content. Yeah, this is very much a what visual is on the page. Yeah. Other thoughts? Like what else aren't we going to have? Aaliyah?
We won't have the like manipulation of the page by the user, like click button or fill in form, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, click button or really any click, fill in. Yeah, Alex?
I'm skeptical about this now, but in our with the have content responses, it has pieces of information from the API response, but I actually think that maybe that's the only thing that's going to be there. It's just going to be more like in its raw form and not like pretty.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not going to be displaying that. We're not going to be displaying that to the user. We're just going to have the raw content or the raw data. Lee?
I have a question around this. So
yes.
Since we are creating this API, would this be a case where we wouldn't want to use mocks and stubs as much as we have been with the APIs because we want to actually test it?
Correct. Yes. So I think this is a good list here. This question's a little bit harder, but what is the library or the tool that gives us these methods? Where do these methods come from? Taya? Let's go to, lots of good answers. Let's go to Regina.
Capybara.
There you go. Yeah. So we won't have any capybara. So these are all capybara things. Great job. So really, capybara is the gem that allows us to interact with the web page as if we were a user clicking on buttons. Another one we didn't mention is visit. We're not going to need visit anymore. We're not going to be like viewing a page. Page itself is a capybara thing. Click button, fill in. We're not going to have any of those things. What we are going to do instead is we're going to send a request and test the response. So we're really trimming down our interaction with the website. Now it's not user visiting a page, typing in this URL, filling in a form, blah, blah, blah. It's just send a request, get back a pure data response. And that's really what an API is. Natia?
So if I like drop an API endpoint into the browser, right, it is like, this is everything in that API. So
Yep.
why wouldn't you just be like, go to this web page, tell me it says all of these things I wanted to say?
You could do that. Like if I go to api.github.com, like, yes, I can actually see this data in the browser, but this is the limit of what I can do. So what I don't get back with this is I don't get like any header information. I don't get any, I don't get back any, I think I would actually be able to test the status code information. But where this really gets limited is once you need requests other than simple gets. As soon as you start making posts or puts or deletes or anything like that, that's where this is limited. Molly?
It's maybe a bit directionally off topic, but can you explain what Capybara is exactly doing that allows that to happen?
Yeah, Capybara is a library that gives us methods to interact with the page. Under the hood, it is what I would refer to as a headless browser. So in the same way that some developers had to write some code for Google Chrome to just make it work, Capybara is the same thing. There is some code associated with Capybara. Somebody built this thing that can interact with the web. It's just that it's very dumbed down. It doesn't have any sort of like visual element. It's just automated. So you can think of Capybara as Google Chrome, but stripped down of all the bells and whistles with no sort of like visual component.
Okay, thank you.
All right, y'all. That will do it for our intro discussion. So what I'm going to have you all do next is I'm going to have you all work through the tutorial. So this lesson plan is a good resource. It has some good notes on REST. It has some more kind of like review on APIs, why we would use APIs, what JSON is. And it gives us some like methods we could play around with. This is all really well and good, but what I want to start with, or where I want you all to start with, is these practice exercises. So where it says complete the exercise here, this is what I want you to start with. I really want you, like, we could talk about this all day. I really want you to like get your hands on it and start building an API. Make sure that you start with reading this background on versioned APIs. I think that's a really good intro paragraph here. And yeah, just go ahead and start working through this tutorial. My plan is to have us come back together at 10 just to check in, and we'll do some kind of like debrief around it. I will type all that up and put it in the chat as well. If you want to go ahead and take a palm and then come back, those instructions will be waiting for you. Or if you're ready to start coding, you can go ahead and start going right now. But for the next 30 minutes, you'll be on your own working through this tutorial. Take a palm as you need it. Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to go write up those instructions and put them in the chat or in the cohort channel.
Are we getting off of this call, or are we staying on this call?
If you want to hop off the call, that's fine, but I'll leave it open just in case anybody has any like setup install issues, anything that would benefit the group. Bye. This is more of a free form class anyway. Lee, does that, do you have any follow up there?
No, that just fully brings it all around. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. other questions from this? Lawrence, is that a new one?
Kind of, just to check and make sure I got that. So when we were looking at that, it had like ID slash, and then a symbol I missed, but like ID slash quotes. And then it would have the symbolize 41. So when we go in and throw that into book params is just going to be able to tell that that is the ID key equals 41.
Not when we throw it into book params per se. Lee, can you do JSON.parse? Capital, yeah, all caps, perfect. And then book.all.toJSON. Pass it as an argument, book.all.toJSON. So book.all.toJSON is the format in transit. JSON.parse would be what a developer would do on the other end to then transform it into an object, which would be a hash.
Where does that happen in like create? Because create just receives that JSON string, as far as I can tell, because it's receiving the string, it paths straight there, and then you render the JSON. I don't see any parse, but it's still using book params, and book params requires keys.
I see. So Lee, on the right pane, can you scroll down? Yeah, so this is what you're referring to for book params. And Lawrence, if I understand your question correctly, your question is, if JSON is the format that we're returning, well, it's also the format that we're sending to our Rails app. If I look at your, if I look at this, let me try and highlight here. It is right. Lee, can you scroll down a little bit in this test? Let's go find, yeah, the create a new book. Yeah, that's what Lawrence is referring to. Okay, so Lawrence, let me know if this sounds right. So what make it a little bit bigger, because here is I think the key part. So what we're doing is we are taking a hash right here. We're turning it into JSON. Let me do this from the beginning, and I'll try to be a little neater. So what we're doing is we're taking a hash, we are transforming, sorry, I couldn't figure out that word, transforming it into JSON right here. And we're sending that JSON along with this post request. Then our app is going to take that JSON and pull it out of these book params to create a new book right here in our create action. Does that sound right so far? Okay, so I think what your question is, if what I said is true, if JSON is just like a raw string, at what point does it get turned into a hash that we can use in these book params? Is that fair? Okay, I think the answer is that is just the underlying behavior of how our params hash works. Our params hash is this special object in Rails, and it is smart enough to take that raw string and turn it into a nested hash that we can use in our controller. So thank you for pointing that out. I think that's one missing piece that we hadn't talked about, is that the params hash itself is smart and does a lot of stuff for us.
So just by passing it into a param, it does a render.json. It does a JSON.parse symbolize names true.
Yeah, that must be happening under the hood somewhere where we can't see it. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know how to articulate that correctly.
No, it's okay.
That answers everything.
It's okay. And I think that's really important for us to talk about now that we're like back to the beginning of class. Now that we're building APIs rather than consuming APIs, our perspective has shifted. Now, rather than just receiving JSON in our app, now we're receiving the JSON in our test. Like our perspective has kind of flip-flopped here a little bit. Joe?
In terms of like technical terminology, like this will be building it, but then what would be technically like the exposing part? I know obviously we're building it to expose it for other people to consume, but I just want to be able to differentiate when I describe it in interviews or whatever, possibly.
Yeah, I would say that those two terms are mostly synonymous, building an API and exposing an API. Both, I think I see what you're getting at. You could make a distinction of building the API is just writing the code, but it's not really exposed until the site is like live and running and therefore accessible on the web. Typically, we use those words pretty interchangeably. I would say that in this tutorial, you are both building and exposing an API.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Mark?
It's kind of like a follow-up to Lee's question. It sounds like it's standard to send a string across like HTTP like request and response or whatever. Is it like, I guess it's not conventional to send like a hash or something, or?
I would say it's not possible to send a hash over HTTP. So I would think of it less as you're sending strings through HTTP. Think of it more of an HTTP request is just one big string. A way that I could illustrate that is if I go to my terminal here and I curl something. So I do curl-v google.com. This is all just a sequence of characters here. So this, what I've highlighted, is my HTTP request. It's just a sequence of characters. It's back to our like pen pal analogy. It's the format that you write your letter in. There's no like data structure in here. There's no string, there's no hash, there's no object, there's no, whatever. This is just raw characters. Yeah, the same thing for the response down here. If I highlight this again, we can see what kind of looks like code in here as this HTML, but it's still just a string of characters. It's the browser's job to take this string of characters and interpret it. So the browser is going to take this raw string and interpret it as, okay, there's this outer HTML tag, and then there's this head tag, and there's a title tag. So the browser has to take the string and interpret it as tags, as HTML tags. Same thing with your JSON. Someone on the receiving end of this response has to take it and determine what to do with it, like transform it into a hash. So just to summarize, Mark, don't think of it as we're sending a lot of different types of strings, or we're sending this string, we're sending a hash, whatever. Just think of it all as one big string.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. We've got about 3 minutes here. Does anybody have any other questions? Lawrence?
This might be a like, it depends question, but how common is it to have like columns in, say, your book table that you wouldn't release in your index?
That is a good question. That is very common. Maybe I'll generalize it a little bit more. So I'll ask that question as, how common is it that we need to customize our JSON responses? So maybe it's take away a key that we don't want to expose. Maybe it's add a new key that's not stored in the database. Very often we will want to do that, and we're going to have a class on that next week. That is customizing JSON in your API.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Joe?
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, like in the lesson plan, it talked about if there was like an attribute that you wanted to change to something else or get rid of, kind of like what you're talking about, but people are already consuming that API. in order to kind of make this gradual jump to or transition, I guess. So that's the point of versioning, correct?
Yeah, you've got it. Versioning so that we can maintain backwards compatibility. So if we create version 1 of our API, rather than just changing that one version, if we only have one version and we change it, then anybody who's on that version has to change instantly. They have to change with us, which is not great. That would mean that people's apps would just be breaking. So we make, rather than just changing version 1, we make version 1, release version 1, and then go develop version 2. So then we give others who are using our API time to transition from version 1 to version 2. And usually what people will do, what developers will do, is they'll give like a deadline. They'll say, this version 1 is going to be deprecated December 31st, 2023. So you better move over to version 2 by then. Something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, sometimes you see it in like your terminal with some code, but that makes sense. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, I think you can also see it with one of the APIs that we were using. I think the Congress API was one where when we used it, it was actually on version 2. Yeah. All right, y'all. So that's going to do it for our for this class. I did not expect for us to like kind of end here with like, now you know everything about exposing an API. But I think we were able to tackle like some of the like the big picture questions. And at the very least, I think everybody is set up and running with this tutorial. So I will expect you to take some time on your own to work through the rest of this tutorial and kind of use that to help inform you of how you're supposed to build an API. That is going to be what you're doing for the next project. So maybe you're not going to tackle it tonight because you still have the viewing party project due tomorrow. But I think for tomorrow, after your eval and Friday, this is some really good study material for you all to dig into. Up next, I would like all of you to check in, do a quick accountability buddy check-in. So please do that before you head off to lunch or whatever your next task is. And then at 1 o'clock Mountain Time, you're going to be in your PD groups. And Allison dropped some instructions for that into the cohort channel. And that will do it. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. That was great.
Thank you, Brian.
You're very welcome.